I'm Stephanie, 34 years old, and 6 years into my marriage with Brian. When we tied the knot, I thought I was gaining the family I'd always dreamed of. His mother Judith seemed to have other plans. Over the years, I've been systematically excluded from family events, treated like an outsider despite my efforts. When I discovered they'd planned Judith's lavish 60th birthday dinner without me, something inside me snapped. I canceled the entire reservation. Before I tell you how that unfolded, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit subscribe, and stay for the sweet taste of justice served cold. Growing up in small-town Kansas, without much family left its mark on me. I lost my mom to cancer when I was 12, and my dad followed 3 years later after a heart attack. Shuffled between distant relatives who viewed me more as an obligation than family, I grew up craving the belonging I never had. Perhaps that's why I chose pediatric nursing as my career, to provide comfort to children who might feel as vulnerable as I once did. The hospital became my sanctuary. Between 12-hour shifts in the pediatric ward, I found purpose in holding tiny hands through scary procedures and celebrating small victories. My colleagues became the closest thing to family I had, and for several years, that was enough. Then came the Spring Charity Gala 6 years ago. The Hospital Foundation's annual fundraiser brought together staff, donors, and community partners for a night of philanthropy. I almost skipped it, preferring the company of my patients to forced small talk in formal wear. My supervisor, Katie, insisted I attend, saying I needed to live a little outside these walls. That's where I met Brian, tall with kind eyes and an easy smile that reached them. He was representing his architectural firm, which had designed the hospital's new children's wing. When he approached me at the dessert table and asked about my work, I expected the usual polite nodding followed by a quick exit. Instead, he listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and shared stories about his sister Amanda's premature twins who had spent time in the NICU. "You're the kind of nurse I wish they'd had," he told me that night. "Someone who truly cares." Our courtship was a whirlwind. After 3 months of dating, Brian proposed during a weekend getaway to a lakeside cabin. His family seemed thrilled at the engagement dinner his parents hosted at their sprawling colonial home in the suburbs. "We've been waiting for someone special for our Brian," his father George said, raising a toast. And it looks like he finally found her. Judith, Brian's mother, smiled politely across the table. She was elegantly put together in a way that intimidated me, perfect blonde bob, tasteful jewelry, and a home straight from a magazine spread. Still, she hugged me and said, "Welcome to the family, dear." His sisters, Amanda and Heather, both married with children of their own, gushed about wedding plans and family traditions. "You'll love being part of this family," Amanda promised. "We do everything together." That's exactly what I wanted, to be part of something bigger than myself. During our 6-month engagement, I threw myself into building relationships with Brian's family. I offered to help Judith with her garden club's annual fundraiser, baking dozens of cookies and arranging centerpieces the night before. I babysit Amanda's twins and Heather's 3-year-old son whenever they needed a break. I remembered everyone's birthdays and preferences, keeping notes in my phone about George's love of historical biographies and Judith's collection of vintage brooches. Our wedding was beautiful, a fall ceremony with golden leaves and burgundy accents. Judith insisted on handling most of the planning, which I initially appreciated given my limited experience with family celebrations. When she changed my flower choices without consulting me or replaced my selected band with her country club friend's son's group, Brian assured me it was just her way of helping. "Mom's always been the family coordinator," he explained. "She means well, even if she can be a bit controlling." The first holidays as a married couple gave me a glimpse of what was to come. I arrived at Thanksgiving dinner with homemade pumpkin pies, only to discover Judith had already ordered desserts from her favorite bakery. My contributions were relegated to the kitchen while the store-bought spread took center stage. At Christmas, family traditions reigned supreme, with no room for new ones I hoped to introduce. When I mentioned my mother's special Christmas morning cinnamon rolls, Heather quickly cut in, "We always have Mom's French toast casserole. It's tradition." Still, I remained hopeful. These things take time, I told myself. Families have established rhythms that don't change overnight. When our lease was ending, Judith suggested a house just 3 blocks from their home that had recently gone on the market. You'll be close enough for impromptu dinners and Sunday brunches, she enthused. Despite my reservations about the commute to the hospital, Brian was excited about being near his family, so I agreed. They'll become your family too, Brian promised as we unpacked moving boxes. Just give it time. I wanted so badly to believe him. After years of feeling like I belonged nowhere, I was desperate for the tight-knit family Brian described. I hung family photos throughout our new home, including several with his parents and sisters. I was determined to earn my place in the Fisher family, whatever it took. The small exclusions began so subtly I almost doubted my own perceptions. 3 months after we moved into our new house, I came home early from a shift to find Brian getting ready to leave. "Where are you heading?" I asked, kicking off my shoes. "Oh, just dinner at my parents'. Mom made pot roast." He kissed my cheek. "I figured you'd be tired after your shift." I was tired, but I also would have appreciated the option to join. When I mentioned this, Brian looked genuinely confused. "I didn't think you'd want to come. You're always saying how exhausted you are after work." This pattern repeated with increasing frequency. I'd discover after the fact about family movie nights, impromptu barbecues, or shopping trips that just came together without me. When I'd express hurt feelings, Brian would have a ready explanation. It was last minute, they didn't want to bother me, they thought I was working. Then came the first major family photo session, organized for George and Judith's 35th wedding anniversary. I took a rare Sunday off, bought a new dress in the navy blue Judith had specified, and arrived at the park where the photographer was setting up. "Oh, Stephanie," Judith said with a tight smile. "I thought you were working today." "I switched shifts specifically for this," I replied, confused by her reaction. "Well, we're doing immediate family photos first," she said, guiding Brian, Amanda, Heather, and their families into position. I waited on a nearby bench, scrolling through my phone as they posed in various configurations. After 45 minutes, I approached the photographer to ask when we'd be included. "Actually, I think we've got everything we need," he said, glancing at Judith, who was reviewing shots on his camera. Mrs. Fisher said the extended family couldn't stay long. Extended family. The word stung as I realized they'd completed the entire session without me. When I confronted Brian in the car, he sighed. "Mom's particular about these things." The photos were really for their anniversary album. "But I'm your wife," I insisted. "How am I not part of your immediate family?" "You are, of course you are," he said, squeezing my hand. "Mom's just old-fashioned." She meant blood relatives for this particular shoot. Similar incidents multiplied. At Sunday dinners, Judith would reminisce about family vacations or Brian's high school girlfriend Laura, who apparently remained in touch with the family. "Laura always understood our family dynamics so well," Judith would say, glancing my way. "She still sends me birthday cards, you know. Such a thoughtful girl." Inside jokes and references to past events filled conversations, with no one bothering to explain the context to me. I'd laugh along awkwardly, feeling increasingly like an audience member rather than a participant in family life. "Remember when Dad fell off the dock at Lake Geneva?" Amanda would say, triggering howls of laughter from everyone except me. When I'd ask Brian later, he'd shrug. "It's hard to explain if you weren't there. It's just one of those family things." Family things that excluded me by definition. Judith's passive-aggressive comments grew bolder over time. She'd run her finger along our mantel during visits, examining it for dust. "Housekeeping was never my strong suit either, dear," she'd say with a thin smile. Or she'd rearrange dishes I'd prepared for family potlucks, adding garnishes or sauces to help it look more appealing. When I tried talking to Brian about these patterns, his defenses immediately rose. "You're being too sensitive," became his refrain. "That's just Mom's way. She's like that with everyone." But she wasn't. I watched how differently she treated her daughters, calling them daily, planning girls' trips, showing genuine interest in their lives. With me, conversations remained superficial, her questions perfunctory. The sisters followed Judith's lead. Heather would post photos on social media of ladies' lunch with Judith, Amanda, and even their cousins, events I never knew about until I saw them online. When I'd mention them, the response was always along the lines of, "Oh, it was just something we threw together last minute." 2 years into our marriage, I still felt like an outsider looking in. The Fisher family Christmas card arrived addressed only to Brian, with a family photo inside where everyone wore matching sweaters, a photo session I knew nothing about. I began to withdraw emotionally as a form of self-protection. I took extra shifts at the hospital, volunteered for holiday rotations, and found reasons to miss Sunday dinners when I could. The rejection was simply too painful to face weekly. My neighbor Tara became my lifeline during this time. A divorced art teacher with a refreshing directness, she noticed my declining spirits over our shared fence. "Those people are toxic," she declared one evening as we shared wine on her patio after I recounted being excluded from yet another family gathering. Classic passive-aggressive behavior designed to make you feel unwelcome without them ever having to own it. "Brian says I'm too sensitive," I admitted. Tara snorted. Classic gaslighting. "He's been conditioned by his mother to normalize her behavior." "You're not crazy, Stephanie. You're being systematically excluded." Having someone validate my feelings was like oxygen after years of suffocation. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't the problem. George, my father-in-law, was the only one who showed consistent kindness. He'd seek me out at family gatherings, asking about my work and sharing stories from his days as a high school science teacher. Once, after witnessing Judith correct my table setting before dinner, he squeezed my shoulder in passing. "She means well," he whispered, an apology in his eyes. But he never openly contradicted her or stood up for me. By our 5th anniversary, the dynamic was firmly established. I was an accessory to Brian, tolerated but not embraced by his family. I had stopped trying so hard, stopped believing things would change. I maintained cordiality for Brian's sake, but protected my heart by expecting nothing. Little did I know that Judith's 60th birthday celebration would become the breaking point that would finally force everything into the open. The first mention of Judith's 60th birthday came during a Sunday dinner in early spring. I'd reluctantly attended after a double shift, mostly because Brian had insisted his mother had something important to discuss. So, Judith announced over dessert, hands clasped excitedly, "As you all know, my 60th is coming up in June." Everyone nodded enthusiastically. George patted her hand affectionately. "I've been thinking about what I want to do," she continued, "and I've decided on dinner at Le Chateau." Le Chateau was the most exclusive French restaurant in the city, requiring reservations months in advance and charging prices that made my eyes water. "That sounds lovely," I offered, trying to participate positively. "I've heard their duck confit is amazing." Judith continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Amanda, I'm thinking you could handle the reservations since you know the maitre d' from the charity circuit." "Of course, Mom," Amanda replied. "I'll call Pascal tomorrow." "And Heather, would you help me find the perfect dress? Something elegant, but not too matronly." "Absolutely. We'll make a day of it," Heather gushed. I waited for my assignment, but none came. Instead, conversation flowed to specific dates, the private dining room options, and who from Judith's garden club and country club committees should be invited. Trying again, I said, "I'd be happy to help with planning too. Maybe I could coordinate the cake or flowers." Judith smiled tightly. "That's sweet, dear, but I think we have it covered. Amanda and Heather know my preferences." The conversation moved on, leaving me feeling invisible once again. Brian, engrossed in discussion with his father about golf, didn't notice my discomfort or attempt to include me. 3 weeks later, I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when a photo stopped me cold. Heather had posted a selfie with Judith and Amanda outside an upscale boutique, captioned, "Shopping for Mom's big birthday dinner. #perfect dress, #60th celebration." I stared at my phone, a familiar ache spreading through my chest. Another outing I hadn't been invited to. I texted Brian immediately. "Did you know about a shopping trip for your mom's birthday?" His response came hours later. "Yeah, the ladies wanted a girls' day. Thought you were working anyway." That evening, I brought it up as Brian was watching sports highlights. I would have appreciated being included in the shopping trip for your mom's dress, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I could have rearranged my schedule. Brian barely looked away from the TV. It wasn't a big deal, Steph. Just a quick shopping trip. You hate shopping anyway. That's not the point. It's about being included in family activities. He sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. You're making mountains out of molehills again. Mom just wanted her daughter's opinions on dresses. I let it drop, swallowing the hurt as I'd done countless times before. But the incident added to the growing pile of exclusions I couldn't ignore. A week later, I was in our home office printing documents when Brian's phone rang. He answered in the kitchen, but his voice carried. Hey, Amanda. Yeah, reservation set. Private room for 16. June 12th at 7. Yeah, Mom's thrilled. June 12th. I mentally checked my work calendar. I had requested that entire week off months ago for our planned anniversary trip to Napa, which Brian had recently suggested postponing due to a work project. I would definitely be available that evening. When Brian ended the call, I approached him casually. So, June 12th for your mom's dinner? He looked momentarily startled. Oh, you heard that? It's fine, just confirming the date so I can plan accordingly. He nodded, seemingly relieved I wasn't upset. Yeah, Le Chateau at 7. It should be a nice evening. I waited for him to specifically mention my attendance, but he turned back to his laptop without elaboration. The final confirmation of my exclusion came 3 days later. Brian had left his email open on our shared computer. I wasn't snooping. I needed to check our flight information for a trip we were planning later in the year, and Brian kept all travel documents in his email. A message from Amanda caught my eye. Judith's 60th, final details. I clicked it before I could think better of it. The email contained a formal invitation attachment with elegant script announcing, "Please join us to celebrate Judith Fisher's 60th birthday." Below was the restaurant information, date, and time I already knew. But it was the guest list at the bottom that felt like a physical blow. George Fisher. Brian Fisher. Amanda and David Parker with Emma and Lily. Heather and John Sullivan with Ethan. Judith's sister Nancy and husband Robert. George's brother Thomas and wife Patricia. Judith's best friends Susan and Carol with husbands. My name was nowhere to be found. 6 years of marriage, and I wasn't considered worthy of inclusion at my mother-in-law's milestone birthday dinner, a dinner my husband would attend without me. I was still staring at the screen when Brian came home from work. He must have read my expression perfectly because his face immediately fell. You weren't supposed to see that, he said quietly. Clearly, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm inside. Why am I not invited to your mother's birthday dinner? Brian ran a hand through his hair, looking pained. Mom wanted to keep it to just family and her closest friends. The words hit like a slap. I am family, Brian. I'm your wife. You know what I mean, he said defensively. Blood family. And some couples she's known for decades. Amanda's husband is invited. Heather's husband is invited. Your uncle's wives are invited. Every other spouse is invited except me. It's different. They've been around longer. I've been your wife for 6 years. My voice finally broke. How long do I have to be married to you before I count as family? You're overreacting, Brian said, his tone hardening. Mom gets to decide who she wants at her birthday dinner. And you're okay with her excluding your wife? You didn't stand up for me at all. What did you want me to do? Demand she invite you and create drama? I stared at him, tears blurring my vision. Yes, that's exactly what you should have done. You should have said, Mom, Stephanie is my wife, and we're a package deal. If she's not welcome, then I won't be attending either. That's ridiculous, Brian scoffed. I can't miss my mother's 60th birthday. But you can let her treat your wife like she doesn't exist? The hurt was morphing into anger now. 6 years, Brian. 6 years of trying to be part of this family, of being pushed aside, excluded, and made to feel unwelcome. And you've allowed it every step of the way. The argument escalated from there, with Brian accusing me of making everything about myself and not understanding family dynamics. I pointed out example after example of exclusion and disrespect, but he had a justification for each one. Mom's particular about her inner circle. The sisters have a special bond with her. You're too sensitive about these things. Eventually, he grabbed a pillow and blanket from the linen closet. I'm sleeping on the couch tonight. We can talk when you're being more reasonable. I lay awake all night, replaying 6 years of slights and exclusions, of Brian's constant defense of his mother at my expense. By morning, my sadness had crystallized into something harder: determination. When Brian left for work the next day, he acted as if nothing had happened, kissing my cheek and mentioning he'd be home late because of birth. As soon as Brian's car pulled away from the driveway, I called Tara. Despite the early hour, she answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, clearly hearing something in my voice. I poured out everything: the email, the argument, the 6 years of systematic exclusion culminating in this final insult. "I don't know what to do anymore," I concluded, wiping tears. "I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle." Tara was silent for a moment before responding. "The question isn't what you should do about them. It's what you should do for yourself. You've been accommodating this toxic behavior for years, hoping things would change. They haven't, and they won't, not unless you force the issue." "How?" "Brian won't even acknowledge there's a problem." "Sometimes," Tara said carefully, "people need a wake-up call. A concrete demonstration of how their actions affect others." The seed of an idea began to form in my mind. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you stand up for yourself in a way they can't ignore or explain away. Something that makes your point impossible to dismiss." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, turning over possibilities in my mind. The invitation details kept flashing before my eyes. Le Chateau, 7 p.m., June 12th. 16 guests in the private dining room. Everyone who mattered to Judith would be there. Everyone except me. I opened our home office filing cabinet where I kept household records. Flipping through bank statements and bills, I noticed a pattern I'd been too trusting to see before. While I'd been covering our mortgage and most household expenses from my nursing salary, Brian had been sending regular checks to his mother for family investments and shared expenses. Next to those records were receipts for gifts, expensive jewelry for Judith's previous birthdays and Christmas presents, designer handbags, and spa packages. In contrast, my last birthday had been marked with a grocery store cake and a blender to replace our broken one. The financial discoveries added fuel to my growing anger. This wasn't just about emotional exclusion. There was a material imbalance that I'd been blind to. With newfound clarity, I reached for my phone and searched for Le Chateau's number. My heart pounded as I dialed, unsure if I would actually go through with what I was contemplating. "Le Chateau, bonjour. This is Antoine speaking. How may I help you?" The maitre d's accented voice answered. "Hello," I said, surprised by my own steady tone. "I'm calling about a reservation for June 12th at 7 p.m. It should be under Brian Fisher for a party of 16 in the private dining room." "Ah, yes, madam. The 60th birthday celebration for Madam Judith Fisher. Everything is arranged as requested: champagne upon arrival, the special menu selection, and the chocolate soufflé with gold leaf for dessert." So they'd planned every detail, all without my knowledge or input. "That's correct," I confirmed. "I'm actually calling because we need to cancel the reservation." My heart thundered in my chest as I said the words. There was a pause on the line. "Cancel, madam? The entire reservation?" "Yes," I said, the word surprisingly easy to pronounce. "Unfortunately, circumstances have changed, and we won't be able to proceed with the dinner as planned." "I see." Antoine's tone became more formal. "I should inform you, madam, that as per our policy with private dining reservations, the cancellation fee at this point will be 50% of the estimated total." I hadn't considered this aspect. The dinner would be extraordinarily expensive, and a 50% cancellation fee would be substantial. "I understand," I said, making a split-second decision. "Please charge it to the card on file." After confirming the details and receiving the cancellation confirmation number, I ended the call, my hands trembling slightly. What had I done? The magnitude of my action began to sink in. I had just canceled Judith's meticulously planned 60th birthday dinner. There would be consequences, severe ones. Brian would be furious. His family might never forgive me. But another part of me, a part that had been silenced for too long, felt something different. Relief. Power. After years of passively accepting disrespect, I had finally taken action. I spent the next hour writing a letter to Brian, explaining my feelings and actions without apology. I detailed the years of exclusion, his failure to stand up for me, and why I'd reached my breaking point. I didn't write it in anger, but in sorrow and determination. I canceled your mother's birthday reservation because I needed you to understand how it feels to be excluded and dismissed, I wrote toward the end. I'm staying with Tara for a few days. When you're ready to discuss our marriage as equal partners who respect and support each other, I'll be ready to talk. I packed a bag with essentials, placed the letter on our bed, and called Tara to ask if her offer of her guest room still stood. An hour later, I was settled in her cozy spare bedroom, alternating between moments of panic about what I'd done and a strange, liberating calm. They're going to be furious, I told Tara over tea in her kitchen. She shrugged. Probably. But they've been disrespecting you for years with no consequences. Sometimes you need to shake the snow globe to change the picture. I turned off my phone, knowing the dinner was hours away and wanting to delay the inevitable fallout. Part of me wondered if I'd just destroyed my marriage, but another part questioned whether a marriage that required me to accept such treatment was worth preserving. As evening approached, I felt almost disconnected from myself, watching the clock tick towards 7 p.m. with a strange detachment. Somewhere across town, the Fisher family would be arriving at Le Chateau in their finery, expecting champagne and celebration. Instead, they would find no reservation, no private dining room, no specially prepared menu. Just the uncomfortable reality that someone had finally said enough. At exactly 7:06 p.m., I turned my phone back on. It immediately began buzzing with notifications. 15 missed calls from Brian, 7 from Amanda, 3 from Heather, and even 1 from George. The text messages poured in faster than I could read them. Brian, what did you do? Amanda, the reservation is canceled? Are you insane? Heather, Mom is crying in the car. I hope you're happy. Brian, call me right now. I set the phone down, my heart racing, but my resolve intact. Tara raised an eyebrow from across her living room. The volcano has erupted, I said, attempting a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. Let it burn itself out, she advised. Nothing you say tonight will be heard rationally. We settled in with a movie and takeout, though I barely tasted the food or followed the plot. My phone continued to light up with calls and messages, which I glimpsed but didn't respond to. Around 9 p.m., a voicemail notification appeared from Judith herself. Curiosity got the better of me, and I listened. Stephanie, Judith's voice was thick with tears. How could you do this to me? On my special day? After everything we've done for you? Brian is beside himself. This childish, vindictive behavior just proves what I've always. I deleted the message before she could finish. By 11 p.m., the barrage had slowed. The final text from Brian read, I don't even know who you are anymore. We're at Mom and Dad's. Don't wait up. I slept fitfully in Tara's guest room, alternating between doubt about my actions and simmering anger at the audacity of their responses. Not one message had acknowledged why I might have done this or recognized the years of exclusion that led to this moment. The next morning, I checked my phone to find 37 missed calls and dozens of texts, including several from numbers I didn't recognize, likely Judith's friends who had been invited to the dinner. I scrolled through enough messages to see they ranged from confused to hostile, but none showed any insight or remorse. Tara and I were having coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Brian on the porch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his face haggard. You don't have to talk to him, Tara assured me. No, I think I do. I squared my shoulders. But I'm not apologizing. I opened the door but remained in the threshold, not inviting him in. Brian looked simultaneously exhausted and furious, his eyes red-rimmed. What the hell, Stephanie? He demanded without preamble. Do you have any idea what you did? I crossed my arms. I know exactly what I did. I canceled a dinner I wasn't invited to. It was my mother's 60th birthday. Do you know how humiliating it was to show up and be told our reservation didn't exist? The restaurant was completely booked. We couldn't even get a regular table. We ended up eating takeout at my parents' house while Mom cried all evening. That sounds awful, I said calmly. Almost as awful as learning your husband's family doesn't consider you important enough to include in significant celebrations after 6 years of marriage. Brian ran his hands through his hair in frustration. This isn't about you. It was Mom's birthday. It's never about me, Brian. That's exactly the problem. My voice remained steady, surprising me. For 6 years, I've been treated as an afterthought by your family, with you enabling it every step of the way. So this was, what, revenge? Some childish payback? No, I said. This was a wake-up call. I've tried talking to you countless times about how your family treats me. You dismiss my feelings, gaslight me into thinking I'm overreacting, and never, ever stand up for me. What other option did I have? You could have acted like an adult instead of ruining an important event. I looked at him incredulously. An adult? Like your mother, who deliberately excluded your wife from her birthday dinner. Like you, who went along with it rather than standing up for our marriage. Brian's anger seemed to falter slightly in the face of my calm reasoning. It wasn't like that. Mom just wanted certain people there. And I didn't make the cut. Your wife of 6 years didn't qualify as certain people, but every other spouse did. How exactly should I have interpreted that, Brian? He shifted uncomfortably. You went nuclear over one dinner. One dinner? Are you serious? I laughed without humor. This was the final straw after years of exclusion. The shopping trips I'm never invited to. The family photos I'm left out of. The inside jokes no one explains. Your mother's constant comments about how I don't quite measure up. Your sister's following her lead and treating me like an outsider. And you, my husband, allowing all of it. Brian's righteous anger was visibly deflating, replaced by defensive justification. You're exaggerating. My family has always been welcoming. Welcoming. I shook my head in disbelief. Name one time your mother has made a genuine effort to include me in anything important to her. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to produce an example. Exactly, I said softly. I've spent 6 years trying to be part of your family, Brian. 6 years of bringing thoughtful gifts, remembering birthdays, offering help, showing interest in their lives. And I've been consistently pushed aside, with you making excuses for their behavior every time. Brian stared at me, seemingly at a loss for words. Finally, he sighed. You didn't have to cancel the dinner. There were other ways to handle this. I tried other ways. For years. You didn't listen. I stood my ground. I need changes, Brian. Real changes, not promises that things will get better someday. I deserve to be treated with respect, especially by my husband. He looked defeated rather than furious now. I don't know what you want from me. I want you to go home and really think about whether you're married to me or to your mother's expectations. Because I can't keep living like this. Brian turned to leave, then paused. The cancellation fee was over $2,000. Consider it the price of this lesson, I replied, closing the door gently but firmly. I leaned against the closed door, exhaling shakily. Tara appeared from the kitchen where she'd been pretending not to listen. You were magnificent, she said, squeezing my shoulder. Later that afternoon, my phone rang with George's number. I hesitated before answering, preparing for more accusations. Stephanie. My father-in-law's voice was gentle, lacking the anger I expected. Hello, George. I'm not calling to yell at you, so you can relax, he said, a sad note in his voice. Mind if we talk for a few minutes? Go ahead, I said cautiously. What you did yesterday, it wasn't right. He paused. But I understand why you did it. His words caught me off guard. You do. I've watched for years how Judith and the girls treat you. How Brian fails to stand up for you. I've been complicit in my silence, and I'm sorry for that. Tears sprang to my eyes at this unexpected acknowledgement. Thank you for saying that. Judith is set in her ways, George continued. She's always seen Brian's partners as competition rather than additions to the family. It was the same with his college girlfriend. But that doesn't excuse her behavior toward you. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked. He sighed heavily. 40 years of marriage teaches you which battles to fight. I chose peace over confrontation, but in doing so, I let you suffer. That was wrong of me. We talked for nearly 30 minutes, the most honest conversation I'd ever had with any member of Brian's family. George promised to speak with Judith and the sisters, though he made no guarantees about changing deeply ingrained behaviors. Brian loves you, he said before hanging up. But he's never had to choose between his wife and his mother before. Give him time to figure this out. As I ended the call, I felt a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. At least one person in the Fisher family saw me clearly. 3 days passed without contact from Brian. I returned home briefly to collect more clothes and work materials, timing my visit when I knew he'd be at the office. The house felt different somehow, as if my decisive action had altered its very atmosphere. On the 4th day, I finished my shift at the hospital and drove home, feeling it was time to face whatever came next. Brian's car was in the driveway, and lights glowed from the living room windows. He was sitting on the couch when I entered, hands clasped between his knees, looking up as the door opened. The anger from our last encounter had faded, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion and uncertainty. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," I replied, setting down my bag but remaining standing. "Can we talk?" I nodded, taking the armchair across from him rather than my usual spot beside him on the couch. The physical distance seemed to underscore the emotional one between us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Brian began, his voice subdued. "About what you said. About how my family treats you. About how I've failed to stand up for you." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I was so angry about the dinner," he admitted. "I couldn't see past that. But then Dad talked to me, and he made me really look at things from your perspective." He rubbed his face wearily. "I started thinking about all the times you mentioned feeling excluded or uncomfortable, and how I dismissed your feelings." "You did," I confirmed quietly. "Every single time." "I know. And I'm sorry." He looked directly at me. "I've been a terrible husband, Stephanie. I've prioritized my mother's feelings over yours consistently. I've let them treat you like an outsider instead of my wife." The apology was unexpected. I'd prepared for more anger, more accusations, more deflection. "Why?" I asked simply. "Why did you allow it for so long?" Brian sighed deeply. "Honestly? Because it was easier. Because confronting my mother means drama and tears and guilt that can last for months. Because I told myself it wasn't that bad, that you were overreacting." He shook his head. "I was wrong. I see that now." "It might be too late," I said, voicing the thought that had been circling in my mind for days. "I don't know if I can stay in a marriage where I'm not respected." Fear flashed across Brian's face. "Don't say that. Please." He leaned forward. "I know I've screwed up badly, but I don't want to lose you. Words aren't enough anymore, Brian. I need to see real change." "I know. That's why I've set up an appointment with a marriage counselor." He pulled out his phone, showing me the confirmation email. "Dr. Martinez has excellent reviews for helping couples navigate family boundary issues." The concrete step surprised me. "You've already scheduled it?" He nodded. "For next week, if you're willing to go." He hesitated. "I also told my mother and sisters that we need to have a family meeting. Here, at our house, on our terms." My eyebrows rose involuntarily. "You did?" "Yes. I told them that how they've treated you is unacceptable, and if they want me in their lives, they need to respect my wife." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope, though caution tempered it. "What did they say?" Mom cried, "Of course." Brian grimaced. Amanda was defensive. Heather was quieter. But they agreed to come tomorrow evening. I considered this. If we do this, if we try to move forward, I need certain conditions met. "Name them," Brian said immediately. "First, no more dismissing my feelings or telling me I'm too sensitive. When I say something hurts me, you need to take that seriously." He nodded. "Absolutely." "Second, we're a unit. If I'm not invited to something, you don't go either. We're a package deal." "Agreed." "Third, I need you to actively stand up for me when your family crosses boundaries, not make excuses for their behavior afterward." "I will. I promise." And finally, I continued, if we're going to pay for your mother's cancellation fee, it comes from your personal savings, not our joint account. And we'll be re-examining our financial arrangements completely. Brian looked momentarily surprised by this condition but nodded. That's fair. I should have been more transparent about our finances. We talked for hours that night, laying bare issues that had festered for years. There were tears on both sides, painful admissions, and eventually, a tentative reconnection. I agreed to move back home but maintained that the real test would be the family meeting the next day. When the doorbell rang the following evening, my stomach clenched with anxiety. Brian squeezed my hand reassuringly before opening the door to reveal Judith, George, Amanda, and Heather. Their expressions ranged from Judith's barely contained indignation to George's gentle encouragement to Amanda and Heather's obvious discomfort. "Come in," Brian said formally, setting the tone that this wasn't a typical family gathering. We'd arranged the living room deliberately. Brian and I sat together on the couch, with the family members in chairs positioned across from us. The physical arrangement symbolized our united front. After uncomfortable small talk about the weather, Brian cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. We asked you here because we need to address how Stephanie has been treated by our family." Judith immediately stiffened. "If this is about the birthday dinner..." "It's not just about the dinner, Mom," Brian interrupted firmly. "It's about 6 years of Stephanie being treated as an outsider." "That's simply not true," Judith protested. "We've welcomed her into our home, included her in family gatherings." "May I speak?" I interjected, my heart pounding but my voice steady. All eyes turned to me. "For 6 years, I've tried to be part of this family," I began. "I've remembered your birthdays, helped with your events, babysat your children, shown interest in your lives. And consistently, I've been treated as temporary, as less important, as not truly family." "That's ridiculous," Amanda scoffed. "You're at every Sunday dinner." "Being physically present isn't the same as being included," I replied. "Let me give you examples." Methodically, I listed incidents. The family photo sessions I was excluded from, the shopping trips I was never invited to, the inside jokes never explained, the subtle put-downs about my housekeeping and cooking, and ultimately, the birthday dinner I wasn't deemed worthy to attend. While every other spouse was invited, I concluded. Every single one except me. A heavy silence filled the room. Amanda looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. Heather stared at her hands in her lap. "We didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome," Heather finally said, her voice small. "I never thought about how all those little things might add up." "Intent doesn't erase impact," I replied gently. "Whether you meant to or not, the message I received was that I don't belong." Judith, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during my recitation, finally spoke up. "So you ruined my birthday dinner out of spite?" "Mom," Brian warned. "No, it's a fair question," I said. "I canceled the dinner because after years of trying to talk about this problem and being dismissed, I needed to make a point that couldn't be ignored." "Was it extreme?" "Yes, but nothing else had worked." "You could have talked to me directly," Judith insisted, tears forming in her eyes. "Would you have listened?" I asked sincerely. "In 6 years, have you ever once asked me about my feelings or experiences in this family?" Judith opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to provide an example. George, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Judith, the girls and I need to take responsibility here. We've followed your lead in how we treat Stephanie, and it hasn't been fair." "So now I'm the villain?" Judith's voice rose. "After everything I've done for this family?" "No one's calling you a villain, Mom," Brian said firmly. "But your behavior toward my wife has been hurtful and exclusionary. And it needs to stop." The confrontation continued for nearly 2 hours. There were tears, defensive arguments, and painful admissions. Judith cycled through denial, anger, and victimhood before finally falling silent when Brian delivered his ultimatum. "I love you, Mom." "I love all of you," he said, looking around at his family. "But Stephanie is my wife, my partner, my chosen family. If you can't treat her with respect and genuine inclusion, we'll need to limit our involvement with this family." Judith gasped. "You would choose her over your own mother?" "I shouldn't have to choose," Brian replied steadily. But if you force that choice, yes, I will stand by my wife." The silence that followed was profound. George reached over to take Judith's hand, whispering something in her ear. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before finally looking at me directly. "I don't understand why you couldn't have handled this differently," she said, her voice subdued. "But perhaps I haven't been as welcoming as I could have been." It wasn't a full acknowledgement or apology, but from Judith, it was significant. Amanda and Heather, seeing the direction things were heading, offered more direct apologies for following their mother's lead without considering my feelings. As the family prepared to leave, no magical resolution had occurred. Judith hadn't suddenly transformed into a loving mother-in-law, nor had the sisters become my best friends. But something had shifted, a pattern had been named and challenged, and Brian had finally stood by my side. "We'll try," George promised as they left, giving me a gentle hug. For Brian's sake, if nothing else. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was a beginning. The 6 months following our confrontation with Brian's family were challenging but transformative. Dr. Martinez, our marriage counselor, helped us navigate the complex dynamics with skill and insight during our weekly sessions. "Family systems resist change," she explained in our 3rd session. "When you disrupted the pattern by canceling the dinner, Stephanie, you forced a reckoning that was long overdue. But rebuilding on healthier terms takes time and consistent effort from both of you." Brian, to his credit, embraced the work wholeheartedly. He learned to recognize his tendency to prioritize peace over justice, particularly with his mother. Together, we established clear boundaries. Brian would no longer automatically take his mother's side. Events would be attended as a couple or not at all, and disrespectful comments would be addressed immediately, not brushed aside. "I feel like I'm discovering my own voice," Brian admitted after successfully standing firm when Judith tried to guilt him into attending a family function that conflicted with plans we'd already made. "I've been letting my mother dictate my choices for so long, I didn't know how to say no." Changes in Judith's behavior came more slowly and inconsistently. The first few Sunday dinners after our confrontation were tense affairs, with Judith being pointedly polite but distant. Gradually, small shifts appeared. Stephanie was included in the group text thread about family events. Invitations were extended to both of us rather than just Brian, and occasionally, Judith would ask me a direct question about my work or interests. George made special efforts to bridge the gap, often engaging me in conversation when Judith was being particularly frosty. "She's trying," he whispered during one dinner. In her own way. Amanda surprised me by becoming an unexpected ally. After our confrontation, she reached out for coffee, just the two of us. "I never realized how much I was enabling Mom's behavior," she admitted over lattes. "I've been doing the same thing to my husband's sister, following Mom's pattern of keeping outsiders at arm's length. I don't want to be that person." Our relationship slowly evolved from polite distance to genuine warmth. She began inviting me to events independently of Judith's influence and made efforts to include me in conversations at family gatherings. Heather remained more distant, civil but not particularly warm. "She's always been Mom's closest echo," Amanda explained. "It's harder for her to break the pattern." The most successful family gathering came 4 months after our confrontation, a 4th of July barbecue at George and Judith's home. For the first time, I was included in the preparation, with Judith actually asking for my potato salad recipe rather than sidelining my contributions. During the party, Brian's cousin asked about family vacation photos displayed on the mantel. Judith began her usual narration but then paused, looking at me. "Stephanie wasn't with us for those trips," she said, then surprisingly added, "but we should plan something that includes everyone next year." The moment was small but significant. Brian squeezed my hand, both of us recognizing the effort it represented. I'd also focused on building my own support network beyond Brian's family. I joined a book club through the hospital, started taking Saturday morning yoga classes, and volunteered monthly at an animal shelter. Having my own community made me less dependent on acceptance from the Fishers. "Your worth isn't determined by Judith's approval," Dr. Martinez reminded me. Building your own identity and support system is crucial, regardless of how your in-law relationships evolve. As my 35th birthday approached in October, Brian asked what I wanted to do to celebrate. Nothing elaborate, I told him, remembering previous birthdays that had been overlooked while Judith's were celebrated lavishly. Maybe dinner with a few friends. Let me plan something special, he insisted. You deserve to be celebrated. To my surprise, he organized a beautiful party at our favorite restaurant, inviting my colleagues, our neighbors, and yes, his family. When Judith tried to suggest changing the date because it conflicted with her garden club meeting, Brian held firm. This is Stephanie's day, he told her. If you can't make it, we'll miss you, but the date isn't changing. Judith attended, arriving with a small gift bag. Inside was a vintage brooch from her personal collection, one I had admired years ago. The accompanying card read simply, "Every woman should have something special on her birthday. Judith." It wasn't a profound apology or a declaration of maternal love, but it was a genuine effort. I wore the brooch during the party, and when I thanked her, she nodded with what appeared to be satisfaction. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail addressed to me. I recognized Judith's elegant handwriting immediately. With trembling fingers, I opened it, unsure what to expect. "Dear Stephanie," it began. Writing this is not easy for me, as I've never been good at admitting my failings. But George and our therapist, yes, he finally convinced me to try counseling. Both suggest I need to acknowledge my behavior toward you directly. The letter continued with a surprisingly candid admission of her possessiveness toward Brian and her habit of keeping daughters-in-law at a distance. She didn't offer excuses, but did express a desire to establish a better relationship going forward, if you're willing. It wasn't a fairy tale transformation, but it was progress. I showed the letter to Brian, who read it with tears in his eyes. "I never thought she'd acknowledge it so directly," he said. "This is huge for her." Our marriage had strengthened through the crisis. The cancellation of Judith's dinner, while drastic, had forced issues into the open that might otherwise have festered indefinitely. In counseling, we learned to communicate more honestly, to prioritize our partnership, and to present a united front to external pressures. "What I've realized," I told Brian as we walked along the riverfront on a crisp November evening, "is that the sweet revenge wasn't really about hurting your mother. It was about reclaiming my power and self-respect." He nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that now. And I'm sorry it took something so dramatic for me to see what was happening. Family, I've learned, is complicated. The families we're born into shape us in ways we don't always recognize. The families we marry into come with established patterns that resist newcomers. And the families we choose, friends like Tara who stand by us at our lowest moments, sometimes provide the strength we need to demand better treatment from both." Brian and I continue to work on our relationship, knowing that maintaining healthy boundaries requires constant vigilance. Judith and I have reached a place of mutual respect, if not the mother-daughter bond one once hoped for. Perhaps that's enough. As I look toward the future, I feel cautiously optimistic. The pain of exclusion has faded, replaced by a deeper understanding of my own worth and the courage to protect it. Brian and I talk about starting our own family soon, children who will grow up understanding the importance of treating everyone with respect and inclusion. Sometimes, the most powerful response to being excluded is not to force your way in, but to create your own circle where everyone is welcome. That's what I'm building now, one relationship at a time. Have you ever had to take a stand against family members who didn't treat you with respect? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found my experience helpful, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might be struggling with difficult in-laws. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to stand up for yourself when needed.